Hello, Dane, and welcome back.
Hello, Jeff. Good to be back, and thanks for your ongoing work toward the common good. My highest regard for that.
I'm honored to be able to do it. Thank you. You have looked at the videos. Some of you listening have looked at the videos. This is not snow. It is not natural. God only knows what is in it, what is constituting it. It doesn't melt. It tends to burn. What do we have here?
We have an artificially chemically nucleated material. And, of course, we see once this data really starts to go viral, and it has, we've seen exactly what we'd expect from mainstream media, the attempt to, quote-unquote, debunk and to have what people perceive as experts, meteorologists, which are really at this point across the board nothing more than paid disinformation people, almost without exception, try to dispute this. They try to claim that snow always sublimates, meaning it converts from a solid to a gas without passing through a liquid state. If this was the case, would we have rivers that run year-round?
No rivers, no streams, no lakes, no ponds,
correct.
No moisture.
Correct.
So
I mean, it's hard to see through this. I mean, snow does sublimate under certain conditions, and under some conditions it sublimates significantly, in Gobi Desert type conditions. But the conditions we see here, where people are melting this over a stove, even aside from the black marks, which some could argue would be the sign of soot from some of these butane burners, which I would not think we would see that much soot in that. But even if we let that go, there is no question that this snow is artificially nucleated. We've tested it enough times. There's patents for it. We've identified a number of elements in the snow: aluminum, barium, strontium, lead. We know that in cases of, for example, a positively charged barium particle can nucleate up to 50 degrees. Now, we have some tests that show bromide, which is an endothermic reacting material. An endothermic reaction, unlike an exothermic reaction, I know you know this, I'm just explaining to listeners, Jeff, but this is a reaction that absorbs heat and energy, and people can see, in fact, the article I put out on this issue, I put a lab test in of an endothermic reaction where people can see in the case of barium hydroxide and ammonium mixed in a beaker can lower temperatures to extreme levels. In some cases can lower temperatures up to 100 degrees almost instantly. So, I mean, these chemicals exist, the patents exist. We had mainstream media cover Chinese artificial nucleation of snowstorms. People can Google this. Google engineered snowstorms. Google Chinese scientists engineered snowstorms. So there's no question it's going on, Jeff. And if people in some areas find their snow didn't melt in the same manner, why would we expect that it would be uniform across the globe? Certainly natural snow didn't disappear, or certainly the chemical mix is not going to be uniform across the planet. So the fact that some people have had some tests that seem to not behave in the same way, why would we be surprised that this is an ongoing experiment and every place isn't going to have the same level of saturation?
Now, you said you've identified barium, aluminum, lead, and other things. Now, you have actually already had people take this chemically nucleated snow and do those tests?
We've had tests from previous nucleated events. In fact, some of our tests are from a nucleated event in Northern California, which was the last go-around. Now, interestingly enough, and this is the point I want to stress with people, we know this is an ongoing experiment, and those conducting the experiment are likely to change, or to change their applications. So the last snow we had in Northern California was completely different in composition than the previous 3 years. Instead of the heavy, wet snow, we had what was almost like a powder, like almost a talc powder that had almost no moisture in it at all. And it was so markedly different that it was, it was quite astonishing.
Almost no. Now, I've always known that snow always contains varying amounts of moisture. It's not uniform. But what we're seeing here is ludicrous, and it's not the entire East. All the places that were snowed on didn't have this. Now, the questions that begin to flow immediately are, was this material that chemically nucleated the snow and caused it to fall already up there, or were they spraying above the storm in order to try to precipitate more snow, or whatever they were doing? Do you think it was already hanging up in the air and being pushed ahead of this storm front and enveloped by it, and then it just actually did its thing, more or less as a random event, or was it planned?
I believe absolutely the latter, that this because being outside a number of these events, which I have been through the entire event, all we can hear in the Pacific Northwest when they're nucleating a storm, all we can hear is aircraft, one after another, after another, after another. And even during daytime hours, when you could correlate the precipitation with some sort of time frame from when aircraft have been heard in significant quantity overhead, and these flakes start coming down, it definitely appears to be a disbursement that's occurring over the storms at the time the storms are enveloping. We also have an image of a stripe of snow across about a 20-mile valley. That certainly would indicate that was a disbursement, that the whole valley is snow-free except one stripe. So that can't not be a disbursement that occurred
one
overhead.
Stripe.
Follow me?
Yeah.
So it's certainly happening overhead at that time. And I don't think there's any getting around that. Also, a point I wanted to mention, Jeff, and I try to take in data all day from every source I can. Today on Weather Channel, they made a point repeatedly throughout the day. Weather Channel's job is to make the completely unnatural seem natural. That's
sure,
they're paid actors. So they said repeatedly today, referring to the snow that's going to be falling along the East Coast in the coming days, this snow will be heavy, wet snow, not the kind of snow we had in January. What does that mean? We have a snow for every month now, or they switch gears and they know that this snow was going to be a totally different composition? How could they know that? And why would they make it a point to state it?
Wow.
As the experiment changed again, but that's a direct quote. Wrote it right down at the time. This snow will be heavy, wet snow, not the kind of snow we had in January.
This material, the aluminum and barium, does tend to fall out of the sky. However, if it is nano-sized, Dane, it can hang up there for a considerable length of time, can it?
It can, and I don't mean to insinuate that's the only spraying going on. I'm sorry I did make it sound like that. That's not what I mean. Certainly they're spraying before the storms, during the storms, but there does seem to be a significant additional application during.
People trying to melt this snow. I noticed the one effort to debunk came out rather quickly as soon as the videos began to make their way around the net. Pretty obvious what was going on there. Okay, these major Arctic blasts, the Arctic vortex, whatever you want to call it, how do you read those in terms of the overall picture, Dane? Did this surprise you this winter? I don't know that they're engineered. They may be a byproduct of the constant plying of the skies back and forth and pouring all kinds of chemicals into the skies at the nano size and up. What do you make of it?
Actually, I believe they're completely engineered. And what you mentioned before the show, very, very accurately, an important point that a lot of even the quote-unquote independent news sites are putting out what amounts to disinformation. And what's alarming to me is even some of these sites who claim to be anti-geoengineering activists, if you will, then cite these weather events as being natural. We have a system that's completely disrupted at this point. From top to bottom, there is no natural weather. Even if you had small-scale geoengineering programs going on, that has the potential to disrupt the entire system. But we know we have global climate engineering going on, even by opposing powers, China and Russia on one side of the fence, NATO countries on the other. So at this point, the anomalies we're seeing are so unprecedented that I think it's impossible not to conclude that there is no natural weather. So in the case of the Arctic blasts, the polar vortexes, we see a stationary ridge of high pressure over the west, which we have enough satellite imagery to make clear the unnatural nature of that.
I tracked it since late October through October, November, December. I put up one or two stories showing a progression over a couple of weeks. This enormous high-pressure ridge, like a brick wall, and the storms were coming out of the Pacific Northwest corner, if you look at a satellite picture, moving to the east, and they would real vigorous weather systems, and they'd run into this thing, and they'd sit there, and it's like somebody took a sponge and wrung them out and to turn them into globs and pieces of moisture, most of which would end up being pushed up into the British Columbia, Canada area by the clockwise rotation of this enormous ridge of high pressure. It would push them up into Canada, across a couple of provinces, and down right into the Midwest.
There you go. And I think one of the better articles, or the best articles, was put out by you. In fact, you had a lot of good satellite images on that article, if I remember correctly. Exactly what you put in that article is exactly what's happening. So this stationary ridge of high pressure pumps from a very low dip in the eastern Pacific, picks up moisture, pumps it north, clockwise, as you correctly stated, around the high pressure, like a giant pulley, pulls it back down into the U.S. where it's being sprayed the whole time, and that's cooling that air mass down. So, as you corrected me, I made an unclear point that this nucleation is taking place right above the storm as it's occurring, but the storms are also being sprayed through their entire progression, which helps migrate that moisture, which helps cool the air mass. It's all part of a long, intricate process. But so that rotating wheel has rotated this warmer air through Alaska. By the way, Alaska just had the warmest January on record. Some listed as a tie for the record, others as the warmest. We had temperatures in Alaska of almost 70 degrees while it was snowing in Florida. So, the degree to which the system is being pulled apart should be apparent. So that spins, again, down into the lower 48. They pump this cold air south. They push moisture up from the Gulf of Mexico. Since when do winter storms happen with moisture from the Gulf of Mexico? They combine the two. You have a transition zone of ice storm between the warmer subtropical moisture, which has thunderstorms and tornadoes. You have a transition zone again of ice storm. Then you have where enough saturation is occurring and it's starting to be frozen precipitation. So this is this combination that they put together of this pumping this cold air up over Alaska, down into the U.S., combine it with Gulf of Mexico air, and you have a snowstorm. That's why we have this parade of snowstorms. We had Hercules over the transition from 2013 to 2014. Right now we have Maximus, and there's, I can't think of all the Weather Channel's current names. There's a long list of them, but I think Nika is the next storm. So we have Maximus winding down, Nika ramping up. So this is all theater, and these storms are completely engineered. And if you look at the GISS maps, and I've posted these maps, and I'm about to post another animation of the GISS maps from 1880 to current, you can see the progression of warming. You can see when these geoengineering programs were ramped up, they did have an initial cooling effect in the late 40s up to about 1970, but they damage the climate as they cool for a temporary period. So then the warming began to pick up in earnest, and the GISS maps, the Goddard Institute maps, show this clearly. So this animation should make clear to people what's happening, and more importantly, Jeff, it shows where they're concentrating geoengineering effort over the North American continent, where you have an anomalously cool zone where these engineered storms are taking place, while the rest of the planet is far above normal temperatures.
The weather is broken. Now, the weather is being controlled, and my question to you is the weather being controlled in a chaotic way, or is it being controlled in a micromanagement fashion? I know that you feel that these enormous blasts of Arctic air are being done intentionally. How much of the weather? And now I've watched what moisture does come into the West Coast, and it's just little pieces of garbage is what it is. They're not storm fronts like they used to be. We don't get winds. We live close together. We used to get tremendous winds in a counterclockwise fashion coming up out of the southeast, from sometimes, depending on where the system is, southwest. They'd roar right up the coast, right through the trees. The pine trees would howl. It's wonderful. And the storm system would move through. We didn't see that this year. We didn't get a big wind at all. And usually in November, we get 2 or 3 major storms with tremendous winds from the southeast. Nothing this year, because nothing was allowed through. Now, I have my own views on why this high-pressure ridge was set up there, and they're real simple. I've stated them many times before. I believe that the government had to make a choice. Are we going to allow the rain systems to come through and keep California and the West moist, or are we going to shut them off? Because if we allow them to come through, our reading, and they're reading these things all the time, our reading is that these storm systems are carrying an obvious amount of radioactivity, and people with Geiger counters are going to be able to read their downspout gutters on the ground at their home. They're going to read their ponds. They're going to read rainwater. They're going to read the ground. They're going to know that there's radiation coming down. So we're going to shut it off this year. I don't know if that's true or not. I'll never know. But it certainly looks like it was an option. Could they do that, Dane? And I know the answer, but I'm asking you. Could they shut that off if they wanted to?
We know they can because they have.
Absolutely.
Just in regard to the potential reasons that they would put such a blocking ridge of high pressure up, one thing we have noted here that certainly the radiation is coming in. No denial on that. We've picked up in my location counts of 300 ppb spikes recently, and there's no argument that radiation is coming over, and no argument to a degree that these blocking high pressures would steer some of that around us. But what we have seen, in addition to that, Jeff, is even storms that have approached during some of the late summer months, and even over the last 5 to 6 years from the southeast, when we had even a monsoonal flow, the geoengineers eliminated that moisture from falling in California. And that certainly was not coming from Japan.
Right.
I mean, this was monsoonal flow that could have brought us some moisture, and they aerosolized that. Two ways they can block rain from California. One is the high-pressure ridge that we've talked about, and two is simply an aerosolization of whatever moisture does move across us, and they have done both. So,
wait, when you say monsoon, excuse me, you're talking about subtropical moisture that comes up from near Hawaii. It moves its way over and then up often.
Or from the Gulf of California. From the Gulf of California, it comes up this direction too, just from south of us. And you see that that's the planet's way of cooling itself when it gets too hot. You have a heat wave, and a lot of times the monsoonal moisture will move in. But they eliminated that moisture, again, very methodically. So at this point, it's hard for me not to conclude that California is not just collateral damage, but in fact a target at this point. And I can't know that, but having witnessed them so consistently eliminating our moisture, and now California is on its knees. I mean, literally, the ability for the feds to take water rights, to basically take control of the population.
Oh, yeah.
All the things they do, you know this, are for multiple reasons, not just this or that, but a whole list of reasons they try to accomplish in one thing. But at this point, I believe California is not just collateral damage. It absolutely appears to be a target, and they may, in fact, what if they, let's hypothesize, if they turn the moisture on in March and claim that perhaps trying to use that as a selling point for geoengineering.
Sure.
Look, we can turn the moisture on, we can fix the drought that they created to begin with. You follow me?
Yeah, sure.
They create a absolute cataclysm, and then perhaps they might come in and try to claim geoengineering saved the day if they choose to turn the spigot on for a month. So
I don't know that they're going to admit it, that they have that capability, but you're right. We could get heavy rains in March and April and make up for most, at least a good portion of the deficit. Possible.
Well, we're short where I live right now. At this point in time, for the last 6 to 7 years, we're short 250 inches of rain where I live. Mm-hmm. So we're certainly not going to make it up, and a lot of the forest is already past the point of return. I don't know how far they'll push it, but also one other factor that's affecting what they're doing, certainly what's happening in the Arctic, because this is where the equation becomes even more complex. Right now, there are methane releases occurring. You know this. We've talked about it before in the East Siberian Shelf. Now, as of about 2 weeks ago, it looks like some of that methane release is at least 15 times official estimates. So much methane is releasing from the Laptev Sea with such force it's actually breaking up some of the ice. And, we're seeing methane counts 2,600 parts per billion. It's escalating incredibly fast. And when they pump this conveyor of artificial snowstorms cooling that air off, a lot of that cool air is then pumped back toward that direction in the Arctic. And perhaps this is a mechanism they're using to cool down certain regions, again, at the cost of a worsened overall warming. But if you look at the GISS maps, you see only certain land masses that are being cooled, while you have an overall warming in the oceans that's really running off the charts. And seawater, again, people need to comprehend this. A cubic meter of seawater contains 4,000 times the thermal energy of a cubic meter of air. So what matters is the ocean warming.
Yeah. Okay. Now, look under Dane's name. We've got the fake snow videos up on a page. Whole bunch of them for you. Just click and look. They're all there. What's the upshot of this? What happens to this so-called snow? It's just going to eventually dissipate on the ground. I guess some of it will evaporate. Will there be chemical residue in the soil from it? Is there that much in it? It's all chemically nucleated. In other words, it's fake. What are we going to see?
Well, I can tell you what we've seen in Northern California in the last nucleated snow event we had here, which is about a month and a half ago.
You don't want the kids to go out and eat this stuff. That's the point, right?
No. And, you see the damage to the foliage. Right now, the soil's pH changes. We've talked about that 10 to 12 times toward alkaline. We saw on our pond, after 3 nights with below freezing temperatures, with this nucleated material in the ponds, it formed a layer of ice, which was very anomalous. That ice sat there for 2.5 weeks with pond water temperatures at 40 degrees, nighttime low temperatures at 40-plus degrees, and daytime temperatures in the mid-60s. It sat there for 2.5 weeks. Now, how is that possible? And the chemical reaction appeared to be so strong, Jeff, it was gassing water right out of the pond. The pond levels dropped precipitously, even with this layer of ice on them. And, we know that at least...
Weird.
It is. This is what you'd expect with an ongoing endothermic reaction. It's going to chew up some of that water. That's exactly what it did. And the snow sat in the sun for about 10 days at far above freezing temperatures, and there was not even a moist spot below it. So it seemed to just hold its structure until it sublimated right into the air. And, this is not what you'd expect. If you have snow in the sun at 65 degrees, it should melt into a puddle quite quickly.
Snowpack in the Sierra, I guess you couldn't even use the word pack. There's snow in the Sierra, but it's not pack.
No.
Not much.
No, and when they talk about, again, they jump up and down now if someplace gets 8 or 10 or 12 inches of snow. When I was younger, it was not uncommon for places like Mammoth and Truckee, it could get 5 feet of snow.
Oh, 6, 8, 10 feet.
Yes.
I remember those days.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
No more.
And now, again, part of the reason they aerosolize the storms, it cools that air mass down, and in that endothermic reaction, it utilizes much of the moisture, so you have less precipitation coming down. So now what you see is these big quote-unquote snowstorms that drop a very small amount of snow over a wide area. So they make a lot of headlines, snowing from here to there. Or around the lakes, they've used a couple of lake effect snow situations to create what appears to be some big, deep snowstorm, but very isolated areas. They keep this parade of snows going over the same track again and again and again. Creates a few headlines, a few cold records overall, but very shallow layer of cold, very isolated regions.
I'm wondering, okay, if we have a drought, California farmers on the Sacramento and San Joaquin valleys are going to, as we know, let me rewind a little bit. Farmers have to go to the bank, most of them every year, get a loan to buy their seed, to plant their crop, to raise their crop, and then take that crop to market via brokers who are as crooked as a day is long in many cases. Now, this year, they go to the bank, they get the loan, they plant the seeds, they've got no water to irrigate. There's going to be an irrigation shortage unless they open the floodgates from above in February, March, and April. If the farmers lose their crop, they're going to lose their wallets to the lenders. These farms, many of them, and they're not all corporate giants yet, will eventually go into bankruptcy and be available for pennies on the dollar. Guess who buys up all the small farms? Big factory farms. It's a consolidation. Could this be also a consolidation of mass land holdings of factory farm giants like ConAgra and all the rest of them?
Yes, it absolutely could be. In fact, we've seen similar circumstances happen in Australia where huge regions were droughted out so bad that whole towns were sold for pennies on the dollar. Big ag snapped them up, and now they're controlling that land. But here's where it gets more complicated again. The Monsantos and the big ag companies and those buzzards, so to speak, that are feasting on the carrion, the whole ship is sinking. So, in some senses, Jeff, it's like a pirate crew that as the ship goes down, they're filling their pockets with loot. But how far will that get them with the whole ship sinks? Yes, it's going on. But again, when we have issues like the methane expulsion that's happening right now, and that's changing the equation, that's going to be hard to hide very long. This is what I would argue, that those in power are certainly preparing for a crackdown. That they know that the entire paradigm is imploding, and at the point in time they can't hide that, and the illusion is shattered. The whole paradigm will change at that point. And the purchase of, again, 2.1 billion rounds of 40 caliber hollow point, the digging in with the underground facilities, all that's going on. So back to geoengineering. We have Fukushima as a problem, no question. We have other nuke plants around the world that are going to be problems. But the reason I focused on geoengineering exclusively, because one, if the planet's life support systems are rendered completely dysfunctional,
sure,
no life on Earth. Two, as we inhale this stuff, we're all inhaling. There's no debate about that. There's no question. We have lab test proven. No. It's making us all cognitively less functional every single day. If that progresses too far, we won't be able to meet the challenge of Fukushima or things our government's doing, any other challenge.
And people, excuse me, Dane, and people wonder what happened to America and Americans. Why do they sit on their asses watching television and doing nothing about this? And the answer is really multifaceted. Most prominently, they can't. They literally don't have it anymore. They've not only been dumbed down, but they've been electromagnetically and chemically anesthetized to the extent that they can't function like they used to. It's taken their passion away, their fire. It's just like fluoride and what it did to the inmates in the World War II prisoner camps. Same thing, but on a massive scale. Americans don't have it anymore. They cannot get up and go out and demonstrate. Oh, some of them can push their keyboard a little bit and hit send and think they're doing something. Complete joke. Maybe some of them fax a couple of things. The controllers know that America is essentially theirs. They own it, lock, stock, and barrel. The cattle who run around and the sheep who run around pretending to be people are essentially under their boot. And I hate to say this, and I'm not talking about you people listening to this program, because you people still count. You know what's going on. There aren't enough of you to change anything, but you know sure as heck what they're doing. And this has got to be pretty discouraging to anybody, but we're not going to quit. Dane, am I right on this?
You're exactly right. I mean, you have the human nature that we've seen for all human history that leaves a lot to be desired for the most part, and you add all the elements you just outlined, and you have a very bad equation. The part I would say changes the potential time horizon now is that people will not have the option to keep their heads in the sand much longer. The walls are closing in, heads are going to be ripped out of the sand, and people will have to face this issue. Their perception of reality will be turned completely on its head very soon. So the seeds we're planting may yet sprout with some people, and if we have enough people, we could yet perhaps change the equation. If there's one thing we could accomplish before civilization collapses, and I believe right now that there is no other outcome that's plausible. If we could reach critical mass of awareness, if we could possibly bring the geoengineering programs to light, that one catalyzing issue alone, if we could bring it to light and bring it to a halt, even though we face unimaginable challenges under any scenario, we could yet take a quantum leap in the right direction. If we could stop this one challenge, or meet this one challenge, if you will, that's the single greatest step we could take given the paradigm we face.
Have you any indication from anybody that the program of geoengineering is going to be mitigated, modified, increased? Where is it going? How is it measuring on the graph year after year? Where are we right now?
Radical increase. And in fact, every time we see bad news come from the Arctic, we see a radical ramping up of climate engineering. So in 2007, when the ice cap plunged and started to look like we might have an ice-free Arctic in 2009, that's when we started to see the high pressures being set up on the West Coast. Not so consistently as this year, but that's when we really saw that scenario start to happen. Because in 2005 and 2006, we had 100 inches of rain where I live. Last year, we had 7. So we saw it start to ramp up. 7. We had 7 inches of rain where I live, where we normally have 70. They have cut the rain off for, you've got some on the coast. We've got almost none here. So we saw this scenario set up, and it appeared to be directly related to what they were trying to do in the Arctic. And miraculously, with ice nucleation and pumping this cold air in the manner that they were up over Alaska, everything we described, then they increased the ice extent, the surface area, anomalously for several years. But again, the system still begins to break down, and these temporary and very destructive attempts to fix something in the way they're trying to fix it makes it worse. So now we see them ramping up even more, even in the last few months. More bad news from the Arctic. We saw, in fact, in January, atmospheric methane counts were off the charts. So now we see them completely locking down any moisture from coming straight in off the Pacific, which would tend to heat the lower 48, which would tend to heat the air that they then pump up toward the Arctic. All these things are connected. I mean, there's so many agendas being carried out right now. So I don't see them slowing down. I don't see them stopping until they're made to stop. Right now, they're ramping up as fast as they can. So
they're going to end up owning the majority of farmland, and they're going to fill those farms with GMO crops, which will kill off people and destroy what's left of the organic farming community, which is under terrible attack, as you well know. This is maybe this is part of the plan.
But in a very short time, none of that will matter, because even genetically modified trees, the saplings for the forest right now, you can't grow anything. You can't grow. You know, historically, you could always, of course, plant the saplings in the fall. They would root on their own and be fine. You can't plant anything now. You can't grow anything. So, again, this is the pirates on the ship that's going down, filling their pockets with loot, and they're going to sink
carry
the
them,
ship.
Carry them to the bottom quicker.
That's right. Exactly.
Wow.
So the bottom line is, you know, these programs have to be stopped or all is lost. It's that simple. I mean, there's no greater assault on planet Earth than global climate engineering, period. And if we could bring that to light, it would make clear to the population that's, as you well described, completely comatose. It would make clear to them that this is the end of the road without their participation, period.
Where are we on this, the global warming big con? Where is that? They keep pushing it.
Now they're not. If you look at Weather Channel...
They call it climate change now.
They do. They called it climate change because when they decided to do a big ramp up in 99, after 98 was the warmest year recorded, they needed that term to condition people to not be harmed.
So they basically dropped global warming.
That's right.
They call it climate change now.
But in the last 2 years, what you see, especially now with Weather Channel, anybody who watches Weather Channel should see clearly, their agenda is to paint the picture of a planet that's going into the deep freeze, when the overall data is anything but. We've just passed the 346th consecutive month of above normal temperatures. We've passed
worldwide.
37 years of above normal temperatures. Last year, people forget, last year in the U.S., the warmest year recorded in the U.S. by far. The only thing clouding that picture is massive geoengineering. And again, as they can create these cool downs, create a few records, create some headlines, overall, they're making the warming situation exponentially worse. But we know that's what the power structure does, right, Jeff? Look at the Gulf of Mexico when they sprayed Corexit. And by some reports, Corexit made it 52 times more toxic there.
Well,
but did they care?
They're still spraying. No, they don't care.
The goal was to hide it, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't to make it better. It was to hide it.
Well, all that oil's sitting under the surface halfway down on the bottom, approximately. It's a large mucoid mass is all it did.
Which is why they're not letting anything spin in the Gulf. They do not let hurricanes form in the Gulf now.
I remember that. And what Dane just said is true. How many hurricanes have you seen since Katrina come into the Gulf with any strength? Zero.
They aerosolize them. They wipe them out. We see it on the radar. They wipe them out. If something's going to spin in another direction, maybe cut a swath across Cuba, they'll let it spin. But
yeah, they let it go to Mexico, maybe up to Texas. But you're right. The Gulf, unfortunately, tragically, is dead right now. They're not going to stir it up because the oil would come right back up or onto the shores. They're still spraying Corexit. The flow of oil has never stopped. It's been cut down, but it never stopped. And we're living on a planet that's insane. And then we can also start talking about fracking.
Exactly.
It just, everywhere you look.
People have to get up off the bench, Jeff, and I hope they help us with this cause. Check geoengineeringwatch.org. We'll try to put instructions as to how people can help.
Thanks, Dane. Keep it up.
Jeff.
Okay.
Take care.
Bad news? Yeah. But it's reality. That's what we're trying to do. You have the right to know. It's your choice. You want to know or not know.